We now turn it over to our first two panels of the afternoon. Our panelists for this session are truly, as I indicate, on the front lines. They are truly on the front lines in securing cyberspace and critical infrastructure. First, we have Amanda Craig, the Director of Cybersecurity Policy and Digital Diplomacy at Microsoft. We have Julianne Chow, the Director of Governance, Risk Management, and Compliance at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And finally, we have Kevin Stine, the Chief Security Advisor of the National Institute of Standards and Technology at the U.S. Department of Commerce. And moderating today's session, we have Mark Montgomery, a Senior Fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a Senior Advisor to the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And so with that, Mark, I cede the floor to you.
Hey, thank you very much. And I think I've been watching and the opening statements there, and I think we've had a couple eventful years in cybersecurity, and we heard about that already. I think it's caused decision makers to take a step back and look at our larger ecosystems for enterprise risk management. So today we'll be looking at risk and policy considerations in securing cyberspace. In the federal government, you can see that reflected in steps like the May executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, or any of about 300 congressional provisions that have come down through the pipeline over the last 3 months. And I think the private sector looking at all this and looking at the risk situation has had similar moments of reckoning. And so I think steps generally moving towards a more rigorous approach to defending against and preparing for, responding to disasters from cyberspace or maybe from other non-traditional national security emergencies like a pandemic. We're starting to see much more work in our critical infrastructure. So I do think these changes are going to necessitate shifts in how we educate our future workforce, both as a country and in individual businesses. And we'll need to think collectively or holistically about the security and the resilience of the systems. And I think that gets down to, when you put it in a NICE framework, the challenge is, how do we get cybersecurity educators to bring all this together, balancing the tools, the changing technology, whether there's a prioritization for hands-on learning or not. So we're adding this new layer about risk. And I think that the NICE framework is not really new because it's a newly important layer. The NICE framework's already looked at it. And so I'm excited to have this kind of discussion where this panel is going to try to figure out what the new generation of talent needs to know and be able to do in order to conduct effective risk management in the future. As you mentioned, we got three great panelists, Amanda Craig, Julie Chow, and Kevin Stine. So we'll get right into it. And I'll go to the first question here. I want to start off simply by asking our panelists to talk about why effective enterprise risk management matters. What does good risk management look like? Or conversely, what happens if we don't get it right? And probably all three take a crack at this answer, but Julie, in your world, this is literally, in Health and Human Services, a life or death issue. Can you lead us off by sharing your perspective about what's at stake?
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. Julie Chua here from HHS, and this is one topic where, for the healthcare and public health sector, and also for HHS, it is really a patient safety issue. And I wanted to start with that because with your question, you mentioned life or death, and it's a critical thing to remember, because whenever we talk about cybersecurity, we all say that it is a shared responsibility. We also say that it is a team effort. For us in the healthcare industry, it's fundamentally, as I said, about patient safety and uninterrupted care delivery. So when we have cyber attacks within our hospital facilities, healthcare facilities, it impacts their clinical operations, their ability to provide care, and of course, the patient safety issue comes into play. And we've seen in reports, media, direct conversations with our sector stakeholders that the diversion of patients, diversion of care, total shutdowns, compromised patient data, it really lends itself to that message of making sure that our sector and the stakeholders, the workers within a healthcare facility, they really understand that cybersecurity is not solely an IT issue. That's another thing that we've been trying to advocate, trying to raise awareness about. It is an enterprise issue that impacts mission, care delivery, business, programs, etc. We have also been trying to get our sector to consider treating cybersecurity attacks as any other disaster, hazard, or threat. And that includes how we apply our risk management processes and the way that we prepare. So another thing to be aware of or know about our sector is we are increasingly becoming aware, continuing to be aware that across all elements of our healthcare organizations, doctors, nurses, administrators, and inclusive of your researchers, academia, and our cybersecurity professionals, we are all helping each other have that awareness and have relevant parties understand that it's more than just technology. The last thing I'm going to say is when a cyber attack does occur, we have been trying to get all our sector stakeholders to realize that everyone has a role and responsibility during a response. We've had a lot of case studies where a cyber attack has impacted a healthcare delivery organization, and they are realizing and they have gone through a response, and a lot of the essential functions or critical functions are outside the domain of the IT and information security teams. So crisis management comes in, your IT, information security, your risk management as a whole comes in, inclusive of PR, legal, your budget, your investments, emergency response. So with all that said, it's really imperative for us to realize that enterprise risk management is key to responding, preparing for cyber attacks. And for HHS, both our interagency efforts and our public-private partnerships, I should say, is really leading the path for this and advocating for the awareness of ERM.
Hey, thanks, Julie. If Amanda or Kevin, do you want to jump in on this one, or should I move to the next question?
I'm happy to briefly jump in and just share a few more thoughts building off of everything that Julie said that makes a lot of sense. You know, from my perspective, the patient safety scenarios that Julie is talking about are, of course, certainly in a whole different category of concern. But the other thing that's really striking about this moment that I think everyone sort of talked about today is how many of us are increasingly affected, even if in less dire, but potentially impactful ways, like the continuity of a business, the resiliency of any organization. We see connectivity increasing across all organizations, right? Across sectors, across devices, use scenarios. And as you've already said at the outset, Mark, the challenge that's very pertinent to this symposium is then that there's a growing array of circumstances in which good cybersecurity risk management is increasingly important, and a growing need for a workforce that can respond to that. You know, I think about what good risk management looks like. Surely there will be some variability across different organizations that have different resources, different risk management priorities, but there should certainly be some consistencies as well. One, I think Julie just spoke to really well about, you know, it's not just about sort of protecting technology, it's about thinking about the enterprise's functions that are, you know, critical to its mission, whether it be in the patient safety scenario or otherwise. And that's really should be the kind of organizing kind of principle of all of the activities that accrue to effective risk management. Another one that I think about is just, and I think, you know, this sort of builds on what Director Inglis and Kirsten Todd just spoke about in the last session, is about just having somebody that's in that position of sort of owning the enterprise risk management role on behalf of the organization. Again, this is one where I think it really can look different across different kind of circumstances. At Microsoft, we have an enterprise risk management group. We have a CISO sort of group that play complementary roles in terms of measuring risk and risk management progress and driving security practices across the organization. At smaller organizations, it may just be one person that's wearing multiple hats, but it's either way critical that there is someone clearly identified who has that role and that sees part of that role as driving across the entire organization, everyone's kind of ownership of how they are contributing to that mission.
Thanks. Kevin?
Yeah, maybe yeah, thanks, Mark. Maybe I'll pile on top a little bit. I'll echo Julie and Amanda's comments. I mean, I think the point about, patient safety is a priority. I think every organization has their analogous patient safety priority issue. I mean, every organization has a purpose, and typically that purpose is going to align with their mission and their business objectives. But I think for most organizations, particularly in the cybersecurity space, I mean, most organizations, their purpose is typically not cybersecurity, but it's rather, again, patient safety or delivery of, good, strong energy or electricity or whatever the case may be. But folks will understand that cybersecurity has an impact on their ability to accomplish their missions and business objectives and really achieve their purpose. So again, whether we're talking about cybersecurity or privacy or supply chain or even workforce as a risk management domain, I mean, I think the alignment of all of these different types of risks really comes together under that broader enterprise risk umbrella, and then aligns very nicely with an organization's mission and business objectives, and really helps to inform their decisions. Over.
Thanks, Kevin. And so everyone there talked a lot about risk, and I guess I'd ask Amanda now, what are the major functions that fall within risk management? What kind of activities are we talking about? And I know for Amanda, this is something you're probably thinking a lot about at Microsoft, given the reach of the systems there. What are some of the big categories of activities you're thinking about?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Mark, for the question. I think, it's a big kind of area where you could break it apart in a lot of different ways. I think at a really high level, risk management is about sort of identifying, assessing, responding to risk. And then I think a lot about the important function of also going through an ongoing process that's focused on continuous improvement. Going back to the question that you just asked, I think that might be another attribute to think about. Just effective risk management is one that's focused on continuous improvement. Good risk management is not sort of a point in time assessment or a singular way of protecting an asset or responding to an incident. It's all of that and more on an ongoing basis, with a goal of improving, of closing gaps, of raising the bar based on learnings of what's important or impactful for security. So if, for the purposes of kind of thinking about the different functions, we can maybe break apart the continuous improvement motion for a moment and then focus on what you need to measure improvement of. For those of you familiar with the NIST Cybersecurity framework, I think the 5 functions of that framework's core are really useful here as a kind of organizing construct, thinking about identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovering. So first, you need to identify and assess risk. You need to know about your people, your physical and virtual assets, your supply chain, your business priorities. This goes back to the previous question too, like what is the kind of function that you are seeking to ensure continuity or resiliency of, for example. Think about your regulatory commitments. You need to have in place governance processes to monitor those things, to undertake regular risk assessments and evolve risk management strategies. I think what's really valuable about the way the cybersecurity framework kind of breaks out that identify function and then thinks about the multiple steps that organizations can go through to respond to risk, whether that's making sure that they're having in place sort of protections against those risks being exploited or realized, or ways of detecting, responding to, and recovering when there are kind of instances of those risks being exploited or realized, is that it has that high level framing that is really relevant across lots of different risk management scenarios, and then has kind of more and more granular detail about kind of specific risk management functions that accrue, or excuse me, risk management practices that accrue to those functions. Oh, and sorry, wanted to also kind of then go back to thinking about the continuous improvement function as well, being something that's really important in terms of just the functions of effective risk management. And the cybersecurity framework speaks to this as well, through the use of the current and target profiles and implementation tiers. This is something that from a Microsoft perspective has been really an important piece of the framework and a valuable tool to use. It sort of gives structure to a process of not just kind of doing that point in time measurement, but having a really kind of more interesting conversation that reflects on progress that's been made and where the risk management priorities are going forward. And so that can really then inform very useful decisions about risk management investments.
Hey, thanks. That was a really comprehensive answer. You know, for the government people listening in today, especially ones from federal agencies that are involved with the private sector, the Congress recently, because the risk management functions that Amanda just went through in good detail weren't properly described for federal agencies, they actually passed the Sector Risk Management Agency provision in the last NDAA, and it laid out I think 7 different principal responsibilities. Some of them don't translate well into an individual thinking about risk, but if you look through them, the exact same things that Amanda mentioned, the idea of identifying, understanding, mitigating the threats and vulnerabilities, understanding what's the consequences of actions that happen, then kind of assessing and prioritizing the individual risks you've come across, making sure you're exchanging the information well, and then kind of worst daying it, making sure you've done the incident management and restoration. What's that mean in risk management? And then have you built the plans and are you exercising? So, I mean, and for years, we just kind of said, do risk without describing what risk management was. Now, look, I promise you, since it's a law, there's a 0% chance that it's completely right. But there's a good chance that 90% of what's right in there is good advice for the especially for the for federal agencies to think about when they're going to the private sector. And as I said, that's in section 9002 of last year's NDAA, so something good to look at. All right, Kevin, now that we've described all this risk, what tools are out there to help us approach risk management with more rigor? And how do you expect us to develop as a result of the most recent cybersecurity EO, which I think you could nickname the stuff for NIST to do right now with no actual extra appropriations executive order?
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for that, Mark. Agreed. We are the beneficiaries of a lot of new requirements, both in law and in policy, and we're always happy to do our part. And kudos to Amanda for reciting the NIST CSF and all the functions there, because I think they play a very important organizing role in helping organizations to better understand, manage, and communicate cybersecurity risk, but doing so in a way that can also align with all the other types of risks that organizations are managing today. Again, whether it's cybersecurity or privacy or supply chain, reputational, operational safety, you name it, that list goes on and on. And there's a lot of existing resources, not just from NIST, but from other agencies and even others in industry. Kind of risk management is not a new domain, for example. So there's a lot of longstanding practices in the broader community, in some cases around other types of risks that are managed that can certainly be brought to bear. I think from the NIST perspective, we have longstanding efforts to develop and maintain standards and guidelines that are really intended to help organizations, again, better manage cybersecurity risk at a system level. And then when they're appropriately applied correctly, if you will, those can introduce more rigor into our system development processes. And I think some of these are really starting to highlight through the current EO activities. I think increasingly our risk management efforts are focusing more on how do we align the different types of risk resources, again, cybersecurity, privacy, supply chain, even workforce, in ways that they're kind of all pieces of a puzzle. How do we best align these so that they can be used in tandem, together with one another to really provide a much more robust approach for agencies and even other organizations, federal, large, small, highly capable, or maybe not as much, in a very practical and actionable way to better understand and manage risk. When I look at the EO efforts, and again, my emphasis has been primarily on Section 4 of the EO on enhancing software supply chain security. That just happens to be where most of NIST leadership responsibilities are found. is really about increasing trust and confidence in software. And I think the resources that we're developing in response to the EO are really intended to improve the security of the software supply chain, and even more so helping organizations, again, and in some cases even consumers, individual consumers, to make more informed risk decisions on the capabilities that they're deploying and the software that they're acquiring and utilizing to, again, achieve their whatever their purpose may be.
Hey, thanks. Well, listen, I want to transition this conversation towards workforce development in line with our conference sponsors' prime directives. What kind of competencies are most critical for professionals working in risk management? Are there any particular that you feel your organization is keen to find? I want everyone's opinion on this. We'll start with Amanda, then go to Julie, and then Kevin. So Amanda, why don't you lead us off?
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of different competencies are relevant, right, to this conversation, whether you're thinking about the enterprise risk management function that's measuring, tracking, and put in place processes to enable that continuous improvement cycle, or you're thinking about executing on the various other risk management or cyber risk management functions that we talked about. I think it was Kirsten taught in the last session that said there's also just in general a need for different backgrounds and for interdisciplinary expertise, which makes a lot of sense to me and sort of resonates with my experience. For some of these roles, depending, again, to some extent on an organization's size and approach to managing risk, there might be a need for more technical competencies. Think about things like implementing the technical controls, configuration work, doing some investigation when anomalies are found. For Microsoft in particular, since you asked, I think a lot about software development and and implementing the secure practices around software development, in particular with some of the executive order work that Kevin was just mentioning for Section 4 and the measures to enhance software supply chain security. But for Microsoft and for lots of other organizations, there will also be a need, of course, for lots of other competencies. Earlier we talked about the need to identify and assess risk, like dig into your supply chain, your regulatory commitments, and so on. For that work, you'll need folks like acquisition specialists, lawyers, policy analysts. And for measuring risk posture and driving that continuous improvement process, there may be a need for folks with more of an organizational planning or auditing competencies, or just think about folks with really good communication and collaboration skills and the ability to use those skills to kind of bring others in their organization along and make them care about leaning in and paying attention. Again, I go back to the last session with the kind of acknowledgement of the need for everyone and not just folks in designated roles to build expertise and lean into their responsibilities to help manage risk. To get that to happen, you of course have lots of training programs and other steps to sort of motivate and inform everyone, but a good leader of an enterprise risk management program can also go a long way toward driving that awareness, driving that good behavior, measuring progress.
Thanks, Amanda. And I love that. Yeah, I will tell you, a good leader will probably solve almost any of these complex issues. So spot on. I love that. Hey, Julie, over to you.
So it's interesting, Amanda, that the first and foremost thing you mentioned is the collaboration, or you emphasize that collaboration and the ability to reach out to cross-domain to your counterparts outside of where you sit. I think what we're seeing within HHS is the governance piece of it was a key thing that we were working on, and specifically on the cyber and ERM integration part of the realm of risk management as a whole. So we are seeing that the practical and operational lens of risk management, the technology, applying and implementing the controls and safeguards, we need to balance that with the strategy and the policy that come with it, or even come before it. And that really includes the understanding of the risk landscape of your agency, which if you are in a federal agency, or if you are within critical infrastructure, really understanding the risk landscape of that specific sector. So one thing that we are finding is creative thinking, problem solving, trustworthiness in the relationship building is really key. That's a soft skill, I think, that the risk management domain really lends itself to success. If you have that skill and that soft skill, and you have the foundation of the technical knowledge, it's a great combination. And of course, putting on my GRC hat, that's the types of people that we have within our division. And it is really something that is really important. I think the last thing I'm going to say about that is cross-domain collaboration, and also making sure that you are building, whichever organization you are in, a risk-aware culture. So from an HHS perspective, that is one of our guiding principles, is really making sure people are acknowledging that there are risks. It's not a bad thing, and it is a risk and opportunity. That's another thing that I think ERM is showing us and educating us on, where you're looking at trade-offs. You're not looking at just the negative risk, but also the opportunities that come with that.
Thanks, Julie. Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, definitely agree with Amanda and Julie. Look, I think there's so many different types and dimensions of risk. So there's a need for the technical competencies, definitely the policy competencies, even business acumen, strong communications. I think when I think about risk management, I'm thinking about folks that are open-minded, that are good listeners, that have very strong critical thinking skills. I think all those different skills and capabilities need to be brought to bear. Kind of piling on the diversity of thought and experience as well. I love the wedding dressmaker analogy that Kirsten used in the previous panel, because I think that really says a lot. I mean, having diverse experiences in different operational environments provides tremendous value to, I'm sure, to every organization. I mean, we're all operating in very tricky times, and I think some of the many it may require some creative solutions to help address some of the tactical and the strategic risks that we face. And I think that's going to require that diversity of thought and experience as well.
Thanks. A great series of 3 answers there. I appreciate that. So we've kind of established, I think, that risk management is foundational to every organization and for the government and industry to every critical infrastructure sector. Julie, can you talk to us a little bit about the work roles and career pathways you see in risk management across critical infrastructure sectors, specifically in your case, the healthcare and public health sector? So we're trying to get at here is what sorts of backgrounds might you expect or hope to find when you pick up a stack of resumes?
So that's very relevant for me because I am in search of a risk management chief. So just adding on to our previous responses, I do think that particular to risk management, I am really looking at a very broad set of capabilities and skills. So I don't just look at cybersecurity risk management experience per se. If someone has some risk management experience, or even in the healthcare and public health sector, so if I see someone who has worked in another critical infrastructure sector like energy or electricity, et cetera, I already know that they have that sense of experience of the broad range of risks that a critical infrastructure sector has to manage and be aware of. And I think that's why I made sure that I mentioned that in the very beginning of my remarks is cybersecurity is one of many hazards and threats that critical infrastructure sectors face. So it is time, I think, for all of us to recognize that it is one of many, but it is not unique in the way we manage the risks to cybersecurity. And I think, Kevin, you mentioned it, that there are certain risk management frameworks across the board that can be leveraged to manage specifically cyber threats and cyber risks. I think to make it a little more concrete, especially for our federal audience this afternoon, is when I look at risk management, cyber risk management, I now all the more look at the ERM piece of the work roles and those that are understanding of risk management, period. Because I say that because you can have a cybersecurity professional who says, I manage risk, but they are in a SOC, a security operations center, looking at logs, figuring out which ones are priority, and prioritizing those vulnerabilities. The complexity of that is where cyber and ERM integration comes in, because on the technical, from a technical lens, it does not easily translate to our ERM counterparts when we are trying to elevate or bring forth cybersecurity specific risks. I say this last statement because I wanted to make sure we were able to mention the new NIST IR Series 8286, because I think that is a key publication that NIST released to give us more concrete tools to translate the cyber technology speak into our ERM space and frameworks and processes.
Amanda, Kevin, either of you want to talk on about what kind of backgrounds you're looking for as you pick up that pile of resumes?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for our cybersecurity public policy function, the team that I lead. You know, it's really also something that I think it's applicable to what I understand from the hiring decisions in the enterprise risk management group, and very consistent with what Julie said in terms of actually really looking for different backgrounds and valuing like a range of experiences and competencies in terms of having a full team that brings a lot to bear. I mean, from a cybersecurity policy team perspective, it's certainly useful to have folks in the team that do have some technical competencies and background. It's also really useful to have folks in the team that have a policy or a legal background, and then to have folks in the team that have thought about some of the risk management challenges or just challenges in terms of security across different kind of contexts from different organizational perspectives. So folks that have worked in close partnership with government and consulting or in other kind of ways, and folks that just have kind of random skills in terms of communication and writing and collaboration. So I myself have a journalism background. It's not probably something that you would typically think of as being that relevant for cybersecurity policy. I like to be the writer on the team. There are people that have been on the team over the years that have like international relations background and kind of bring that policy expertise to bear, as well as folks on the team that have had art history kind of backgrounds that just have a different way of thinking and approaching some of the problems and challenges that we're trying to address. And I think the one thing that I would say that is really valuable in thinking about enterprise risk management, cybersecurity policy, a lot of these kind of different functions within organizations is something that we talked about earlier in terms of the importance of collaboration and communication. You know, I think one of the things that's true in a lot of different cybersecurity roles is that you are trying to look across domains, like Julie said earlier. You're trying to kind of play in some cases like a translator role between functions or between types of organizations. And so the kind of backgrounds that I think ultimately lend to being an effective communicator or collaborator, or just being a person that can help stitch those things together, provide clarity across different domains, can range widely. And that's fantastic. And I think if you bring people that have done that in different contexts together, then that's when you can get some really good synergy and some really good outcomes.
That was a great answer. Before Kevin, I just want to point out that everyone is now updating their random skills section of their resume, now that you mentioned that. Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Amanda and Julie said was, and it doesn't always come across on a resume, but maybe more so in interviews of some sort, would be, I'm personally looking for folks that ask questions including questions, why do you do things the way you do? And hopefully with an eye towards, are there better ways for us to do these? Now, from NIST does not have an operational role. So from a cybersecurity and privacy program perspective, we are working with agencies, we're working with different industry sectors or, other nations in some cases, state and local governments, for example, to make sure that the resources we produce are the most useful and practical and actionable. But I want folks that are going to ask questions and say, why did you issue these types of resources? Did you consider this? Did you consider that? Because to the spirit of continuous improvement that Amanda talked about earlier, kind of the status quo and just kind of complacency is something that we need to fight each and every day, so that we make sure that we're not only producing the best resources, but that we maintain those resources in the best way, in the most timely way, so that we're really making sure that the right tools are in the hands of the practitioners, at any given time.
That was a great answer. The front of it too, you made me think of, the core of naval nuclear power training is a questioning attitude. And I think that's really helpful in risk management. All right, so this will probably be the final question, depending on how long people take on it. But I come, as was mentioned in the beginning, I come from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Our team was focused on the changes that policymakers or lawmakers could put in place to make cyberspace a safer place. And setting aside that I'm from the government and I'm here to help, we've seen up close the positive impact the government can have in improving national resilience. When it comes to risk management and building a workforce that is understanding and questioning of it, Kevin, what do you see as the role of the government? Where is that impact best put to use?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. And thanks for all your work on the Solarium Commission, by the way. That was terrific. Really appreciate that. So look, just like every organization, every agency has a responsibility and really a need to manage cybersecurity risk in the context of their missions and their business objectives. And I think that there are lots of agencies that have different roles to play in helping other agencies or even industry to do that. I think we got to make sure we have the right federal policies in place to help ensure that the various types of risks are being managed in a way that is aligned and harmonized, across the federal enterprise, quite honestly. And again, that gets to, not just our existing policies that focus on cybersecurity risk management, but really the existing policies that focus on the federal enterprise and enterprise risk management that's pulling in our financial risk and reputational risk and safety and cybersecurity. We got to have the right agencies that are providing the operational insights and support to inform other agency decisions. And again, I think CISA plays a very strong role there in working across the federal enterprise with individual agencies and others to help with that. Again, our role at NIST is to ensure that we provide the right foundational standards and guides and other tools and resources that are practical and can be applied in the context to help really any organization, again, federal or non, to better understand, manage, and communicate risk. And in doing so in the context of the enterprise, I think tools like the cybersecurity framework or the privacy framework, our supply chain risk management guidance that we have out now and that we're really enhancing based on the current executive order, and we'll be expanding even beyond just looking at software to include hardware and firmware and even IT and operational technologies as well. So kind of all those things come to play. Maybe the last point I'll make is that we do talk a lot about the why and the what of cybersecurity, and I think tools like the different frameworks that are out there really help to hone in on why we focus on cybersecurity from an organizational perspective and what are some of those outcomes that we try to achieve as individual organizations. But I think a lot of the value that the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, really the NICE framework provides, is really focusing in on the who, not the band, but the who is the workforce that we need to better achieve our why, achieve our purpose, and achieve those outcomes that are going to be so important. So again, it's tools like the NICE workforce framework for cybersecurity that come into play to help organizations identify the work roles that are needed today, understand what the workforce of the future may look like from a cybersecurity perspective, and also other technology domains and risk domains, and then how to best fill those workforce gaps over time.
Well, Julie, you're also from the government and here to help. Anything you want to add on that?
I do have one thing to mention, and since we were talking about, or in scope of the panel, is critical infrastructure security. And if you think about that, and those who are in critical infrastructure sectors, there's pillars that we rely on for the security and resilience of these critical infrastructure sectors. So that's government, industry, emergency management, and security. So the public-private partnership is key. And I think that's one way that the government is playing a role in, specifically in cybersecurity for critical infrastructure. So what I mean by that is, outside of legislation or policy or mandate that require federal government to work with our private industry partners, I think we have a lot of opportunity to continue that public-private partnership in many ways. And the other thing also is making sure that when we do respond to executive orders, and of course, as a federal agency, HHS is in that category, we also make sure that our private sector partners are aware of what those outcomes are. And I think this specific EO is encouraging our private sector partners to follow suit with what the federal government is trying to accomplish, aggressive timelines, and all the massive requirements that we are trying to do and accomplish. I think it is one way for us to make aware for our private sectors to know, and what is also expected of them as they continue to work with us.
Thank you, Julie. Amanda, any thoughts on this before I wrap us up?
And no, I would underline what's been said and maybe just add, I really agree with a lot of what you said, Julie, just now about the importance of public-private partnership for cyber risk management and engaging, industry more broadly to kind of get even more traction out of some of the best practices that are being developed. I look to Kevin and the role of NIST and being an excellent convener of those public-private partnerships for this most recent executive order and all of the work around developing practices to enhance software supply chain security. But and lots of other there are lots of other examples as well. The cybersecurity framework that I mentioned earlier being one, but many, many others as well. And so I think that role seems like a very important kind of piece of what the government can contribute here and create opportunities for industry to contribute as well. And I think about the workforce piece in particular, helping provide even just kind of visibility onto the problem and research and context and data, and stitching together sort of the different resources or efforts that do exist, in addition to the government investing itself and the workforce kind of issue. But I think about the NICE framework, the data, the resources that have been developed over the last few years to just reflect on gaps, what's needed, what's working, what's not. All of that, has also been helpful to Microsoft. I'm sure many others. We actually recently launched a new cybersecurity jobs campaign that we really benefited a lot from the research that NICE has already done in this space and kind of reflecting on the opportunity, for example, with community colleges and really focusing on opportunities to kind of build up community college capacity to educate lots more people to fill a really big workforce gap. And so I think that there are probably lots of other ways on the workforce side as well, but that's just one recent example of where the government's played a really helpful role in helping us to even prioritize our investments.
Well, thank you, Amanda. One thing I'd add from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and I think this applies to all areas of cybersecurity, but certainly risk management, is the government could continue to try to build up the educational infrastructure out there. In other words, through the NSA Center of Excellence, the National Science Foundation Scholarship for Service Program, the government can help build the appropriate cybersecurity departments with the right curriculum into them. And I think that'll go a long way to helping solve both the federal government's cybersecurity workforce challenges, but also will contribute. And I think Microsoft's work here with the community colleges will go a long way to that as well. And they're bringing real money to the table there, as does the federal government every year. I want to thank, we're at our time. I want to thank our panelists, Amanda Craig of Microsoft, Julie Chua of HHS, and Kevin Stine of NIST, and pass it back to NICE and FIU for the next panel.
Thanks so much. I want to thank you all for a phenomenal first panel. I mean, amazing insight from Amanda, Kevin, Julie, and of course, exceptional moderating by Mark. So really appreciate the insight that you provided over the last 45 minutes. And more importantly, that you ended right on time. This is one of those rare conferences where we're ending exactly as we intended to. And so that's excellent.